All right, today's video is the first on the actual build of the car, and because of the way circumstances worked out, I don't have the money to build the chassis right now. I mean, other than just putting it on my credit card, which I don't want to do. Since I've got the rest of this year, I am going to be working on the body, which kind of makes sense because I've built a few chassis. I know how to build a chassis. I've never done an entire body from scratch. And so there's going to be some experimentation, and I probably won't get it right the first time. And that's what this channel is about. It's not about, hey, here's an expert way of how to do something. It's, hey, when you don't know anything, here's how to try and figure it out eventually. It's really more inspirational than informational. So anyways, the two things that I'll be starting on are the nose, which will not be this episode. What this episode's going to be is these out-of-focus doors. This type of doors on sports cars were there because the rule said you had to have doors. Really, it would just be easier to step over them. So the doors would open like this. Now the nose and the tail section will be carbon fiber. I'm going to be doing it though in the same process you would if you were doing fiberglass. I just want to demonstrate that you don't need to use an autoclave for carbon fiber, especially for non-structural stuff like this. The doors could be carbon fiber or fiberglass. What I would do in that case is make a metal door that I'd then pull a mold off of and then make it fiberglass. You could have like a simple steel tube frame, light steel, and then fiberglass over it. But you could also make it purely out of fiberglass. But in this case, because I like working with aluminum, I'm just making them out of aluminum. I'm making them a little beefier than they need to be. But let's go outside and I'll walk you through the process. So here's the passenger, or in this case left side door, already done. This will have a piano hinge on the bottom, and it would be like this closed and then would open up like that. And here, this isn't really necessary having this inner panel, but I like that it makes it just feel more substantial. It can be a little alarming, especially for people not used to race cars, when they get in something the first time and one of the first things they touch is the door, and it feels like, oh, this will crumple if I squeeze it too hard. This bit here is kind of the only kind of well, it's not complicated, but less than simple part, and that's because the rear bulkhead also has the start of the seat back, and that slopes forward, and so that kind of needs to be cut out of here so this will close over it. And I may put some kind of latch in there. We'll see when the whole thing's done. But I could have just done this out of fiberglass. Normally the advantage of fiberglass or carbon fiber is that you can make parts quickly. In this case, I would have to make something like this to then take a mold of, and then you could theoretically just make fiberglass parts really quickly. But the thing is, it's less work doing the fiberglass, especially if you don't count the cleanup. But with actual time, if I had to make an outer section and an inner section and glue them together, it's going to take a couple days till that's all cured and ready to go. With the aluminum, I can make a door in a few hours. So I could technically have a replacement ready to go faster than if I was doing fiberglass or carbon fiber. But that's not the real reason I did it in aluminum. The real reason is I just wanted to. That's everything I do here is not because it's the right way to do it. It's because that's what I wanted to do at that moment in time. Something of note here, this here looks kind of crappy, these holes, and I'll explain what's going on there. I could fill this, if I was going to leave this bare aluminum, I could fill that. You can get low temperature aluminum weld. I don't know if it's really brazing rod or what, but you can get that at Harbor Freight, and that'd fill that in nicely, and you'd sand it down and it would look like one piece of metal. Or, since I'm just going to paint it, I'll just use regular light filler in there when I paint it. But what happened there's always a story to my stupidity. These are my excuses. Is I was originally just going to have this be a flat piece, and then I was going to use the shrinker to make an angled piece that would make this curve, and you would rivet it to the inside of this and then rivet it to that. And that's the way I've made a lot of structural things like this in the past. But it dawned on me after I had ordered the metal for it that, oh, well, it would look better if I actually formed this curve hammered it out and formed it. Then I realized, oh, well, I'm going to have a panel gap here, and so I really don't want rivets here, because then I've got to make room for those rivets so the door closes, which means it'll then look like an even bigger panel gap. But the problem is, I had already ordered this aluminum, and as always, we're on a tight budget with this, so I wasn't going to order more aluminum. And the aluminum I ordered is 6061 T6. And not only that, but it is the toughest 6061 T6 I've ever received. I don't know if there should be this much variation in the metal I get, but I usually work with 6061 T6, and some of it has been a lot more forgiving than others. This stuff has been tough. It cracks super easily. What I ended up doing, and we'll see here on the parts for the next door, is I cut flat here, so I didn't have to hammer this and shrink and stretch this. It's just so I can curve this and do it in a matter of minutes rather than all day, for one thing. For the other side door, there are these two. This is the fiddly side with all this, which I did already off camera, because if I did it on camera, I probably would have bent something the wrong way and ruined a piece. Because that happens when I'm not paying attention and things end up in the trash bin. We'll do the simpler piece on camera, and so this is how it starts. And as far as figuring this out, this takes a little more math. I mean, it's not bad, but with this, really the pertinent things are the whole thing needs to be 9 inches tall. It needs to be 16 inches long. I just decided I want this 1 inch thick here, so it's not an edge that seems like, hey, that's pointed right at my neck while I'm driving. And this is 2 inches down here, and there'll be a piano hinge connecting there. Normally I would do something like this in 40 thousandths thick metal. This is actually 50 thousandths on the outside and the sides, and I did 40 thousandths on the inside. And that's just because, again, I know this thing's going to take some abuse. It'll have amateur drivers in it, and I've had some experience with 40 thousandths where you drop something on it and it doesn't have to be that big, and you can tell something was dropped on it and you have a rather permanent dent in it, especially if you can't get to the underside to hammer it out. This whole door comes in at just over 6 pounds, which is honestly heavier than I thought it was going to come out. Not doing any calculations, just taking a guess. But that's not bad. If I had done this in carbon fiber and made it strong enough to take some knocks, some accidents and whatnot of people getting in and out of the car, kicking it and whatnot, it wouldn't be much lighter. So let's get started on cutting this out. You can use a jigsaw, you can use tin snips, and I'll use tin snips for part of it, but I use some electric shears from Harbor Freight to do most of it, and let's get started on that. Besides being a stress reliever, drilling these holes also gives you a nice place when you're cutting, because I'm going to cut these with tin snips, and that gives me a nice place to stop without causing a crack that goes in. In general, the door's not structural. It just deflects wind at this point. So this doesn't need to be the strongest thing in the world. It just needs to hold its shape. As far as how I decided to make 4 flaps here instead of 5 or 6 or 2 or whatever, I did 3 on this one over here on one side, and it looks crappy. So I did 4 on the other side, and it looks better, so I'm doing 4. The holes I'm drilling, this is a 3/16 inch bit that I use for drilling rivet holes, so I have a lot of these. They're disposable in a sense. They're double-sided, so when one side gets too worn down, you switch. Obviously, I've used both sides of this. That's why it's already kind of shiny. But this is, just drilling aluminum. These things last forever. When you're drilling through steel, they get used up. Having this angle here, it's not so pertinent on here. It's more important when you've got something like this where you need these things to not hit each other when they're going to bend together. But I always kind of do a little bit. It really sucks when you're bending a whole bunch of these things and you've got it almost done. You realize, oh, it's one side's fouling against the other, and now it's really hard to trim it because everything's folded up and stuff. So anytime I'm making these flaps, I always do something like this. Like here, this would be the bottom, and stuff's gonna come over, and maybe your bend's not quite right. And in fact, that it's not going quite to the corner, so I'll fix that. And so you don't want some weird thing here. This is just sticking out 1/2 millimeter, which seems like no big deal, but now the next piece you put on is 1/2 millimeter off, and then maybe that happens somewhere else, and now you've got it just kind of compounds until you have a really funky looking part, and it was all because of tiny little things that were in the way. I want to show on this ways to do this when you don't have a lot of equipment. On some of the bigger stuff, I am going to use the bending brake that I built. I think everything that we're doing for this could be done on the bending brake that you can get at Harbor Freight, the 30-something inch. But even easier than that sometimes, especially because we've got things that are going to be in the way of different stuff. Here, let's start on this one. Is you can just use a vise. And this is 50 thousandths, so it's pretty thin. And because of the way I'm going to do it, I shouldn't have any problems with this bending too tight and causing cracking. But if you are working with thicker material or something that it's giving you trouble, you can, rather than just putting this in the vise, you can put this in between it. This is just some tube steel that's got a pretty nice radius on it, and that radius will help keep this from cracking because it's been bent too sharply. But with this, just as a demonstration, this piece is longer than this vise. So if you have a smaller vise than this, that's fine. In fact, it's beneficial when you're doing things where you've got other stuff in the way. But what you do is just put in the vise and you just kind of get it started. A little more than I wanted. And then it's like messing up over here. And so then you just move it over. A little more than I wanted to, but make sure you line it up so your fold is nice and straight, and then work it a little more, and then come back. And yeah, it's slow and annoying, but the point is you can do it without having to have a finger brake that costs $5,000 and is huge, and you had to have it delivered by a giant truck, and whenever you have to move, you have to do something with it. If you do this and your fold looks a little funky afterwards, which this one came out pretty well, but just run along it with a hammer, and it'll clean it up nice. This is a dead blow hammer. You can use any hammer, really. If all you have is a claw hammer, if you don't have body shaping hammers, which you can get cheap ones at Harbor Freight. But the smoother the surface is here, the better, because otherwise you'll transfer whatever pattern is here onto here. So if you have like a claw hammer and it's got some kind of grippy pattern there, you don't want that going into your metal. See, this is the problem with me filming, is I already did this in the wrong order. I didn't want to fold that one first, because in order to do this curve here, I'm going to use this piece of wood that I cut to that radius. And if I had not folded what I had just done there, if I had folded this and this, I could put it over there, and these would help lock it onto this piece, and it makes it really easy to clamp it down and then hammer that over. This is part of the reason I like to just come out here and work and not make a video about it, is then I've got all of my brain, which I need all of apparently, to do this stuff. I picked that because it was close to the length of the vise, and I thought that would be a nice demonstration of bending with the vise. So now that you've heard all of my excuses, all of my excuses, I'll come up with more. Now, with a longer piece like this, you can, which I'm probably going to do, you can just work it all the way down, which the nice thing of that, it takes longer, but the nice thing is you're moving only this much material at a time, which is easier on your hands because you don't have a lot of leverage when you're doing it like this. But you could also put, these aren't long enough, if I had some longer pieces of metal, you put them in the vise and make it so it's as long as you need it, and then bend it that way. But again, I'm trying to show how you can do this with as little as possible. And once you get it started, once you get the fold all the way across, but just started, it gets really easy because you've got this kink in, which means every time you have to reposition it in the vise, it's going to go to that same spot. So now you can see how easy it would have been if I hadn't folded that yet, because this would have clamped right on there. But I can. This is down far enough that I can still make this work. Again, you can. If I didn't have that fold in it, I definitely would have already done this. But see, normally I would put a C clamp there to hold this in place, but because of that fold, gets a little trickier the more folding you do, because now, for instance, this fold is kind of in the way when I'm bending this over, and that can make it kind of a puzzle. This piece is fairly simple and straightforward, but when you've got other stuff with a lot of different folds in different directions and close together, you have to figure out what order you're going to fold it in, and that can be as important and even more difficult to figure out than actually designing the part. Designing the part's usually easy. Then you have to figure out how you're actually going to make it. Okay, the problem now is this is hitting the back of that. So we're going to have to switch. There's a couple ways we could do this. We use the hand. We use the hand seamers. That's nice because we started the fold, so we already have a nice sharp line. But we could do this. This is pretty tough stuff. I know this is an inch here, so I could just, let's do that. If it ever comes out wavy, you can usually fix it either through hammering or through hand seamers and just massaging it till it's right. But now we've got this end, and you saw before we had the other end. This is going to be the front of the door, and then the other side will be the back. I've prepared a couple pieces. This is going to be the inner panel, which we're not ready for yet. I did this initial fold here on the larger bending brake that I made, which I'll show you more of that later. But this is going to be the outer skin, And what this marks here is where that 4-inch radius bend is going to be. And using this as a guide, this is going to end up being like that, and this needs to curve around that. So what we're going to do is bend this. You could, if you're strong enough, you could bend this over your leg. You could take some like PVC pipe or preferably stronger pipe and bend this over it. I'm going to use an English wheel because I have one. And again, it's a cheap one from Harbor Freight, but it'll get the job done. Okay, so on an English wheel, normally this is designed to bend things in 3 dimensions, meaning it'll bend it this way and this way. If you put a piece of rubber over the anvil wheel, is that considered the anvil? If you put a piece of rubber over the bigger wheel, it makes it so it only bends it this way and not lengthways. So with this, this is not as tight a radius as we're going to ultimately be, but I'm going to start with that. Some pressure, and you don't want to overdo the pressure. If you do, you'll be able to see, you'll get wheel marks, you'll be able to see the path that you took over the metal. It'll bend it faster, but it won't look as smooth. Make it a little tighter. One more set of passes and then we'll move on to the other wheel. See, we've just started the shape there. And we don't have to get it all the way to the exact radius that we're going to. The nice thing about the sheet metal is if I just push it over, if I push against the natural tension it has and riveted it in, it'll give a nice constant radius. But it's tough enough that if I just did that without putting any shape in it, one, it would be really hard to do. Put some big C-clamps and everything, you could do it, but then also might want to really twist the structure and make it wonky in some way. This is helping, so it won't fight me as much when I rivet it on. And that's just about, like, I can do this. I think I just want to put a little more shape in. I think I'll shape a little below this line. I was a little too conservative with it. Maybe a little above it. And then just run through here a couple more times and we'll call that good. I'll put holes, the rivet holes in this, so that when I'm putting these together, this kind of guides me because I've already got the holes measured out. I'm going to do rivets that are 2 inches apart. It doesn't need that many rivets. I do 1 inch apart for structural things on chassis, but when I was doing the other ones, I just felt, maybe because I'm used to doing 1 inch rivets, that anything more than 2 inches looked ridiculous. So like it just didn't look right to me. So we're going to do 2 inches, and what I'm doing here is just kind of figuring out where I can put that first rivet. At this point, I can just do every 2 inches. Okay, that's all I'm going to measure ahead of time. I'm going to do this part once it's riveted in, because that part has to be drilled. And the way I'm going to do these is with this pneumatic punch. And the nice thing about this is the depth from the edge will be the same, which means you get a nice straight rivet line. When you just do it with the drill, you can mark it all ahead of time, make sure they're all lined up, but when you look at the rivets afterwards, they do that. here is nice and flush. I don't want, the more this sticks out, the more you'll be able to see my crappy hole things there. And if it's too far in, then the gap's going to look weird. Plus my rivet holes are pretty close to the edge. So I'm going to clamp it in so that it's flush there. I don't know about that. These are Abdel rivets. They're pretty strong. As I rivet this, this is going to pull this tighter together. So I don't expect where this is clamped to be its finished spot, but it's going to hold it in place as far as being flush, which is what I'm interested in right now. It seems like, there we go. Because of what I'm doing here, I want to do this one rivet at a time and work my way that way so this gets pulled tight all the way around. The downside to doing it this way is you have to make sure you don't have junk from the holes you just drilled stuck in between the two pieces of metal. Again, this isn't a structural piece. It'll work fine, but just best practices, you shouldn't have debris in between the pieces you're riveting together. Something I do on purpose when I'm doing something like this is I leave myself more material than I need because I want to make sure this fold fits as tight as possible here without being too much. So I've riveted more of this piece in than I wanted. I want to get it, I could just drill these back out and take this out. I want to get this as accurate as possible. I could use Clankos to get it, but because of the tension I'm fighting, I actually like completely riveting it in place. But now I've marked where this fold should be, and this here is where the metal should be trimmed to. So I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to fold this on this break right there, and then we'll get back to riveting. Now this thing, I got the general idea just looking at other homemade brakes people have made on the internet. This cost me a little over $200 in materials. I think I actually had the steel shipped here, so a lot of that was probably shipping. But if you want a brake and don't want to pay $5 grand, I highly recommend doing that. All right, so now that's got just enough gap for the inner panel that comes in here to fold inside of it. Same as that one. Okay, now that I've got this side completely done and this side partially, and it's holding its shape, now for this funky part, rather than working from the outside, I'm going to work from the inside. And so I've marked where I want the rivets, just kind of making it even, and I'm just going to hold it in place. That's fine. I'm going to do one more to lock this in place, and then I'll just go ahead and do the other two holes at once. So now working on the inner panel, I've got this bend, which is how that's going to slot into there done. And now I like to do this to the actual piece so I can check both sides and make sure that what I'm doing is actually going to work on the finished piece. So if And this corner here doesn't have to be millimeter perfect. It can, the fold can be a little high or a little low, but then as we work our way down, this part here will need to be really good, or you'll be able to see what our mistake was. But I need to get to there, and it springs back, so that there's not enough. There's almost good. With it in place, main thing we need to do now is measure and cut the notch here. I can tell I need to trim this side in a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit there. And we'll get this cut, we'll get this folded, and then we'll get it riveted in. I haven't mentioned I've been rounding the edges here. It's a nice thing to do, both as a stress relief thing and also because when you're working with sheet metal, you're basically creating something that's just a bunch of razor edges to cut you. Things like this are nice for deburring and softening edges. On this, partly because it's a door, partly just because I didn't get to it earlier. But I mean, being a door, your arm is going to be near it and resting on it all the time. I'm actually going to go to it with a rotary tool and make sure none of the edges are sharp once everything's done and together. But for right now, let's test fit this. There we go. Alright, these holes here are kind of ugly. Might end up filling those. So I'll put weights on this to make sure it's being held perfectly flat and we'll rivet it in. But if you notice on the other door, I put some holes in theoretically to save weight. They're dimpled so they make it a little stiffer. I just think they look cool. So to do that, we've got this tool here, which you come at it from both sides. And you can just use this, which I did, which is why you can see a piece in there. You can use this to just punch the hole straight through. Again, this has been really tough, 6061. So not only was it more difficult than it should have been to do, but it caused some cracking around the edges that now I've got to go grind out. So I'm going to actually cut the holes with the hole saw first, and then just use this to create the dimples after I get that out. These are 3-inch holes. You can dimple holes without one of these. You can cut a slightly bigger hole in a piece of wood and then just hammer around. It takes a really long time though, and if you want it to look really good, it takes even longer. So I really like these. They're not cheap. They can be like $50 a piece. So I didn't use them for quite a few of my builds. And then I just decided I didn't hate myself that much. So I got 3 different ones of common sizes. Kind of wish I could get bigger ones. Let's see if I can do this. Normally I do this with, just do it with a wrench or a ratchet here. And you just tighten it down. Since I've already punched the holes, I'm curious to see if I could just do it with an impact. It might be breaking, you know, that might be too hard on the piece. Maybe that's a bad idea. You didn't see that. Okay. So that's on. This definitely, normally I just keep this for taking it off. Save me a little time. And there's the dimpled hole. just going to put a rivet on the edges because the piano hinge is going to go across here, and the rivets that hold the piano hinge to this will also hold the two flaps together. So there it is. Just needs its piano hinge, and I'll go around and shave the edges with a rotary tool. Let's see. 6.01 pounds. So pretty light, but it's also got to be pretty strong. You know, in case you're in the car and you want to put your hand on it, or what's going to happen is it'll open and then somebody getting in or out will kind of trip on it and kick it. But yeah, 2 doors down, rest of the car to go.